Chapter 1. The smile he didn't expect. He thought the divorce was over the moment he signed the papers. He took the house, the company, the life he said I no longer deserved. He even smiled as he walked out of the room. What he did not know was that he had just agreed to carry every hidden debt, every quiet obligation, every consequence he never bothered to read. I am Claire, and this is not a story about screaming or revenge you can see coming. This is a story about family, silence, and the moment a man realizes too late that asking for everything was the worst mistake of his life. The conference room smelled like old paper and disinfectant, the kind of sterile calm that pretends nothing irreversible is about to happen. The lights overhead were too bright, flattening every color into pale gray. I sat with my hands folded on the table, my wedding ring long gone, my back straight, my breathing slow and measured. My name is Rowan Hale. I am 46 years old, and I was sitting across from my former husband, convinced for the first time in years that I was exactly where I needed to be. Across the table, Miles Hale looked relaxed, almost cheerful. He wore a navy suit that still fit him well, the kind he reserved for moments when he wanted to feel in control. His hair was neatly styled, his watch positioned just right on his wrist so it would catch the light when he moved his hand. If you did not know him, you would think this was another business meeting he was about to win. He thought so too. Miles leaned back in his chair and glanced at his attorney with a quick smile, the kind that says, "Let us finish this. The sooner the better." His knee bounced under the table, a small tell he never noticed about himself. He wanted this over with. He wanted to walk out believing he had taken everything that mattered. I watched him without expression. His attorney, a man named Daniel Mercer, flipped through the thick stack of papers between us. Daniel had the careful posture of someone who knew every word on every page, but still treated the documents like they might bite. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and then leaned closer to Miles. He lowered his voice. I could not hear what he said. I did not need to. Miles stiffened. The color drained from his face so quickly it startled even me. His hand tightened around the pen he had been tapping against the folder, the knuckles whitening as his fingers curled. His eyes flicked down to the papers, then back up to Daniel, then briefly to me, as if checking whether I had noticed. I had. That was the moment I smiled. It was not a wide smile, not a triumphant one, just a small curve of my lips, almost involuntary, like my body had decided before my mind caught up. The kind of smile you make when a long-held breath finally leaves your lungs. Miles saw it. His brows drew together, confusion flashing across his face. For a split second, the confidence he had walked in with cracked. Then he straightened, schooling his expression back into something closer to calm. He looked at me like he was trying to remember when I had become dangerous. I kept my gaze steady. I said nothing. For months, Miles had spoken as if today were inevitable. He told anyone who would listen that he was being generous, that he was willing to let me walk away with dignity. He said I should be grateful he was making things easy. Easy, to him, meant I did not fight. Easy meant I agreed. And I had. I had agreed to almost everything he asked for. The house, the investment properties, the business accounts, the liabilities he insisted were temporary inconveniences. He wanted all of it, and I had signed where my attorney told me to sign, my face blank, my voice level. Miles thought that meant I had lost. He thought today was the end. Daniel cleared his throat again and began organizing the papers into neat piles. Miles leaned forward, eager now, his earlier unease already fading. "Let us just get this done," Miles said, his voice casual but tight. "I have another meeting in an hour." Daniel nodded and slid the folder closer. Miles reached for his pen, tapping it once against the table, twice. He did not read. He never did. He trusted summaries, trusted assurances, trusted that the world worked the way it always had for him. He trusted that I would not let him make a mistake. I watched his hand hover over the signature line. Something inside me shifted. Not guilt, not regret, just clarity. Miles had spent years telling me I was too cautious, too slow, too focused on details that did not matter. He said I worried too much about worst-case scenarios, about fine print, about what could go wrong instead of what could go right. He called my instincts fear. What he never understood was that my instincts were the reason we survived as long as we did. Miles glanced up at Daniel again, impatience creeping into his tone. "Is there a problem?" Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. "No, just making sure we're aligned." Miles snorted softly. "We are aligned." He glanced at me, his mouth curving to something close to a smile. "Right, Rowan?" I met his eyes. "I am aligned," I said. It was the truth. Miles signed. The pen scratched across the paper, the sound loud in the quiet room. He flipped the page and signed again, faster this time. Each signature came easier than the last, as if the act itself was soothing him. When he finished, he pushed the folder away with a satisfied sigh. Finally. Daniel did not look satisfied. He was staring at one page near the back of the stack, his jaw tight. He leaned in again, lowering his voice once more. Miles followed his gaze. This time, he did not try to hide his reaction. His shoulders tensed, his mouth opened slightly, then closed. He swallowed. I felt the smile return, softer now, settled. Miles looked up at me really, as if seeing me for the first time in years. His eyes searched my face, scanning for anger, for bitterness, for any sign that I had planned something. I gave him nothing. I sat with my hands folded, my posture calm, my expression unreadable. Miles laughed, a short, sharp sound that did not reach his eyes. "You look very composed for someone who just gave up everything," he said. I tilted my head slightly. Did I? He frowned. For a moment, I thought he might ask a question, might slow down, might finally read. Instead, he stood, already reaching for his jacket. He needed this to be over. He needed to believe the story he had been telling himself. I watched him button his suit, watched the confidence return to his movements, thinner now, but still there. As he walked toward the door, Daniel remained seated, staring at the papers as if they had rearranged themselves while no one was looking. I stayed where I was. It occurred to me then how quiet the room had become. The hum of the lights, the distant sound of traffic outside, my own breathing steady and even. This was not the moment of victory. This was the moment before everything shifted. Miles believed he had taken everything that mattered. He believed he had won because he asked for everything, and I had let him. What he did not understand is that asking for everything is only a victory if you know what everything costs. As the door closed behind him, I let my gaze fall to the stack of papers still resting on the table. The final pages were neatly tucked behind the rest, dense with language Miles had never bothered to read. I had. And as I sat there, alone in that cold room with its harsh lights and quiet certainty, my mind drifted backward to the years when I first began to disappear from my own life, long before Miles ever realized that there was a trap waiting for him at the end of the path he chose. Chapter 2. When I Stopped Mattering. I was 27 when I married Miles, young enough to believe love could absorb ambition without shrinking either one. Back then, I had a career I was proud of. I worked in operations management for a regional logistics firm based outside Portland, the kind of job that rewarded attention to detail and long hours. I liked solving problems, liked knowing that systems worked better because I had touched them. Miles used to tell people I was the organized one, the steady one. He said it like a compliment then. We married in the fall of 2008, just as the economy was shaking itself apart. It felt romantic at the time, two people choosing certainty in an uncertain world. Miles talked about building something of his own, about getting into property once the market stabilized. I believed in him. I believed in us. When he bought his first small duplex a few years later, I was the one who helped him run the numbers at the kitchen table. I stayed up late balancing spreadsheets while he talked about potential returns. When he asked if I would step back from my job for a while, just until things got off the ground, it felt like a reasonable sacrifice. Temporary. Strategic. I told my boss I was taking time off. I told myself I would go back. At first, I was still part of everything. I answered emails, scheduled meetings, organized paperwork. When Miles met investors or contractors, I was there, smiling, listening, taking notes. People assumed I was his assistant. He never corrected them. As the business grew, something subtle shifted. Conversations stopped including me. Decisions were made before I entered the room. When I asked questions, Miles would wave a hand and say he had it handled. He started calling my attention to small things around the house instead. Can you handle this? Can you take care of that? At events, he introduced me simply as my wife. It happened so gradually I did not notice at first. One day I realized I had not been asked my opinion on anything important in months. I had opinions, I just was not invited to share them. Miles began coming home later. He blamed traffic, meetings, the stress of growth. When I asked how things were going, he would sigh and say I wouldn't understand. That hurt more than I expected. Understanding had once been my strength. Money became his domain. He moved accounts around and changed passwords. When I asked for access, he told me it was easier if one person handled it. He said I worried too much. His mother, Evelyn, started visiting more often around that time. She had a way of surveying a room like she was taking inventory. She would comment on what needed updating, what did not reflect the success Miles was achieving. She spoke about family reputation as if it were a fragile heirloom that only she knew how to protect. She began offering suggestions about how I could be more supportive. Maybe dress differently at events. Maybe speak less. She said men under pressure needed peace at home. I tried. The first time I suspected Miles was seeing someone else, I dismissed it. The second time, I told myself I was being paranoid. The third time, I found proof. It was a text that popped up on his phone while he was in the shower, a name I did not recognize, followed by a message that did not leave much to interpretation. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for him to come out, the phone heavy in my hand. When I asked him about Lena, he did not deny it. He looked tired, almost bored. He said he had not planned for it to happen. He said things had been hard between us. He said I had changed. You were too sensitive lately, he told me. You were always tired, always worried. This is not the life I'm trying to build. I asked him if he was sorry. He said he did not want to fight. After that, nothing returned to normal. Miles stopped pretending. He began staying out overnight without explanation. He told me we would talk later and then never did. When I checked our joint account one morning and found it locked, he shrugged and said it was for the best. If you need money, just ask, he said. I'll transfer it. Asking felt like begging. I stopped asking. Our son, Noah, was 14 then, old enough to notice tension but not old enough to understand it. Miles started having long conversations with him behind closed doors. I would walk into the room and the talking would stop. Noah began avoiding eye contact with me. When I asked him what was wrong, he said his dad was stressed and I shouldn't make it worse. That broke something inside me. The night I realized how far I had slipped, we were having dinner with Evelyn. Miles talked about a new development he was excited about, listing numbers and timelines. Evelyn nodded approvingly. Noah scrolled on his phone. I listened, waiting for someone to ask what I thought. No one did. At one point, Evelyn asked Miles what he planned to do about the house. He answered without looking at me. He had already decided. When I opened my mouth to speak, he kept going, talking over me, his voice confident and loud. I closed my mouth. I pushed my food around my plate and watched the three of them talk as if I were not there. No one noticed when I stopped eating. No one noticed when I excused myself early. In the quiet of the kitchen later that night, I stood alone and realized something I couldn't unsee. I had not lost my voice. I had simply stopped using it. That was the moment I understood that my disappearance had not been sudden. It had been practiced, rehearsed, encouraged. And as painful as that realization was, it carried with it a strange clarity, because once you see how you've been erased, you can stop trying to prove that you belong. You can start paying attention instead. That night, I did not cry. I cleaned the kitchen, turned off the lights, and went to bed beside a man who no longer saw me. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, I felt something settle into place. I did not know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I was done trying to matter to people who had already decided I didn't. Chapter 3. The Years I Said Nothing. Silence became a habit before it became a strategy. After that night in the kitchen, I stopped asking questions that would not be answered. I stopped reacting to things meant to provoke me. I did not announce my withdrawal. I simply folded inward and watched. It was in the spring of 2021 when the first crack appeared. Miles asked me to sign a routine document related to our house, something about a refinancing extension. He slid the papers across the counter without looking up from his phone. "Just sign here," he said. "It is nothing." I picked up the packet and felt a familiar itch at the base of my neck. Old instincts do not disappear. They wait. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat at the dining table and read every page. Halfway through, I realized the numbers did not line up. Interest rates that should have gone down had climbed. A balance that should have shrunk had grown. The next day, I pulled old statements from a file cabinet Miles had not touched in years. Then another, then another. What I found did not look like success. It looked like juggling. Loans layered on top of loans, credit lines open to cover shortfalls, payments shuffled between accounts to create the illusion of movement, money going out faster than it came in. I did not confront him. Instead, I created a spreadsheet, then another. I labeled dates. I matched transactions. I sat in silence while Miles talked about expansion and growth, nodding at the right moments, asking harmless questions. "You are very quiet lately," he said one evening. I smiled faintly. "Just tired." The more I looked, the clearer it became. The properties were impressive on paper, but the margins were thin. The debt was not shared evenly. Most of it was in his name or tied directly to his business entities. I needed confirmation. I made an appointment with a lawyer named Avery Caldwell under the pretense of updating my estate planning. Her office overlooked a small harbor, the kind of place that made everything feel calmer than it really was. Avery listened without interrupting as I explained my situation. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "You are asking the right questions," she said. "You're just asking them quietly." She recommended I speak with a certified public accountant she trusted. Thomas Reed was a soft-spoken man with kind eyes and a methodical way of thinking. He did not react when I showed him the numbers. He simply nodded and asked for more. Over several weeks, we met in his office, stacks of documents between us. "Most of the liabilities are not shared," he said one afternoon. "They are tied to Miles personally or to his companies. That matters." It mattered more than I let on. Avery cautioned me about timing. "If you push too soon," she said, "he will restructure. If you warn him, he will protect himself." I told her I understood. She looked at me carefully. "You are playing a long game." I did not answer. During this time, I met Hannah Moore for coffee. We had worked together years earlier, before I stepped away. She listened as I spoke about my life now, about feeling invisible. "You were always sharp," she said without hesitation. "You do not lose that. You just stop being asked to use it." Her words stayed with me longer than she knew. At home, Noah started asking small questions. "Dad says money is tight," he said one night, "but then he talks about buying another place. How does that work?" I shrugged. Sometimes people say things are fine when they are not. Noah frowned. He did not press further. He did not need to. The moment of clarity came quietly. I was sitting alone with my spreadsheets, staring at a column of red numbers, when it clicked. Miles was not reckless because he didn't know. He was reckless because he believed he could always outrun the consequences. If we divorced and he insisted on keeping everything he had built, the assets would come with the obligations. The shine would not protect him. I felt something settle in my chest, steady and cold. I did not need to accuse him. I did not need to prove anything. I only needed to step aside and let him claim what he believed he deserved. That night, Miles came home late again. He talked about a deal that would change everything. He asked if I was listening. I was. And for the first time, I knew exactly when to say nothing. Chapter 4. The Day He Asked for Everything. The divorce moved faster once I stopped resisting it. By 2024, Miles had decided I was no longer a factor. He told his friends I was tired, overwhelmed, incapable of keeping up with the life he had built. He said it with the same confidence he used when describing market trends and investment opportunities, as if saying it out loud made it true. When the paperwork arrived, he barely looked at me. We sat across from each other in conference rooms that smelled like coffee and printer ink, our attorneys doing most of the talking. Daniel Mercer handled Miles' side. He was efficient, sharp, and careful in a way that suggested he knew where the weak spots were. My attorney, Avery Caldwell, watched quietly, letting Miles speak himself into positions he thought were advantageous. I asked for very little. I did not argue over the business. I did not fight for the properties that looked impressive on paper. I agreed to walk away from the visible symbols of success Miles valued most. Daniel raised his eyebrows once, just slightly. Miles smirked. "See," he said, leaning back in his chair, "this does not have to be complicated." Avery glanced at me. "Are you sure, Rowan?" I nodded. "I am sure." Miles took that as confirmation of his narrative, that I was done, that I had finally accepted my limits. In the weeks leading up to the final signing, Lena became more visible. She no longer hid in the background. She sat beside Miles during meetings, her hand resting possessively on his arm, her smile sharp and eager. "We need this finished," she said one afternoon as we waited for documents to be printed. "I am tired of being in limbo." Miles laughed. "It will be over soon. She has agreed to everything." He did not look at me when he said it. The night before the signing, he paced the living room, talking into his phone. "Once this is done," he said, "I can finally move forward." He hung up and turned to me. "You will be fine, Rowan. This is the best outcome for everyone." I did not correct him. The signing took place in early spring in a glass-walled office overlooking a parking lot still dusted with snow. The air inside was too warm. The table between us was crowded with documents stacked in careful order. Daniel walked us through the process. He spoke clearly, professionally, explaining what each section covered in broad terms. Miles nodded along, impatient. "Just tell me where to sign," Miles said. Daniel hesitated, then continued. As he flipped toward the back of the packet, I noticed Lena lean forward. "Are we almost done?" she asked. "We have dinner reservations." Miles smiled at her. "Almost." Daniel cleared his throat. "There is an addendum here we need to review," he said. Miles waved a hand. "Is it standard?" "Yes," Daniel said. "It outlines financial responsibility associated with the assets being retained." Miles glanced at me, his smile returning. "I'm keeping the assets," he said. "That was the agreement." I did not respond. Daniel began reading. His voice was steady, but I saw the tension in his jaw. "The liabilities tied to the retained properties and business entities remain with the retaining party," he said. "This includes existing loans, lines of credit, and any future obligations required to maintain those assets. The retaining party agrees to indemnify the other party against claims related to these liabilities and to pursue refinancing where applicable." Miles stopped nodding. "What does that mean?" he asked. Daniel paused. "It means that the debt stays with what you're keeping." Miles frowned. "I thought we were splitting that." Daniel adjusted his glasses. "No, based on how the accounts are structured, this reflects the current legal responsibility." Lena shifted in her seat. "Miles, just sign it. We talked about this." Miles stared at the page. Daniel continued, now more slowly. "It also requires you to refinance certain obligations into your sole name within a defined period." Miles looked up at me, his expression sharp. "You knew about this?" I met his gaze calmly. I read the documents. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked back at Daniel. "This is not what I expected." Daniel lowered his voice. "This is how it is written." Lena leaned closer. Miles, please, we can deal with this later. He hesitated. For the first time since I had known him, Miles looked uncertain. He flipped back a page, then another, scanning lines he should have read weeks ago. His leg bounced beneath the table. Rowan, he said, his tone tight, why did you not say anything? I folded my hands in my lap. You did not ask. Daniel cleared his throat again. We can pause if you need more time. Miles' headache shaked. No. He straightened, forcing a smile that didn't quite hold. Let us finish this. He signed. Each stroke of the pen sounded louder than it should have. When he finished, he pushed the folder away and exhaled sharply. There. Done. Daniel did not look relieved. Miles stood, already reaching for his coat. Lena followed him out the door, her heels clicking impatiently against the floor. As they walked toward the door, I remained seated. Miles stopped with his hand on the handle and turned back. You think you won something, he said. I looked up at him. I think you chose something. He scoffed and left. The door closed softly behind them. Daniel gathered his papers in silence. Avery met my eyes, a question there. Are you all right? She asked quietly. I nodded. I am. As the room emptied, I sat alone at the table, the warmth of the office settling around me. There was no rush of triumph, no dramatic release, only a steady certainty. Miles had taken everything he wanted, and now it belonged to him in every sense of the word. Chapter 5. What I Kept. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They came quietly, in layers, the way reality tends to when no one is performing for an audience anymore. My name is Claire Whitman. I was 48 when everything finally settled, and by then I had learned a collapse does not always look dramatic from the outside. Evan Whitman had taken what he wanted, the company, the properties, the image. He had walked out of that glass office believing he had won something decisive. For a while, he carried himself the same way he always had, head high, voice confident, telling anyone who would listen that he was moving on, starting fresh. But the pressure found him anyway. It showed up first in the small things, the calls he stopped returning, the events he stopped attending. Friends who once lingered to hear his stories now glanced at their watches and made excuses. People notice when confidence turns into strain. The business that once made him look impressive began demanding more than applause. Payments came due, refinancing took longer than expected, lenders asked questions he did not like answering. The properties he had insisted on keeping needed attention, repairs, cash. I did not hear about this from him. I heard it from the silence. Evan stopped posting updates about his success. His name appeared less often in conversations that used to revolve around him. When we crossed paths briefly at a school event, he looked thinner, tired, still proud, but less certain. His mother, Patricia, withdrew in her own way. She stopped hosting lunches, stopped offering opinions. When we passed each other in public, she nodded politely and moved on. There was no apology. There did not need to be. Her absence said enough. The woman Evan had been so eager to build a future with faded from the story entirely. Madison had loved the version of him that was loud and unburdened. When the shine wore off, she disappeared. I did not ask questions. I did not need answers. The most important shift happened at home. Our son, Lucas, was 16 by then, old enough to notice patterns, old enough to understand when words and reality did not align. One afternoon, he stayed in the kitchen after school instead of retreating to his room. He sat at the counter, scrolling through his phone, then set it aside. He asked me why I had stayed quiet for so long. I dried my hands and sat across from him. I did not rush to explain. I told him the truth as simply as I could, that sometimes speaking does not protect you, that sometimes listening teaches you more. He nodded. He did not ask me to justify myself. He did not ask me to prove anything. He just listened. That was enough. I realized then that I had not lost him after all. He had simply needed time to see what I could not force him to understand. Life did not become extraordinary after that. It became stable. I downsized. I chose calm over appearances. I paid my bills on time. I slept through the night. I took work that suited my schedule and my energy, consulting quietly for small companies that valued consistency over spectacle. I was not richer, I was not celebrated, but I was safe. Sometimes I thought about that conference room with its harsh lights and cold certainty, how I had once sat there believing that everything important was about to be taken from me. I had been wrong. What mattered was never on the table. It was the ability to breathe without fear, to make choices without asking permission, to be present for my child without carrying someone else's chaos on my back. Evan carried what he insisted on keeping, in every sense of the word, and I carried myself forward. If you have ever been underestimated because you stayed quiet, because you chose restraint over reaction, because you let others believe you were weaker than you were, ask yourself this: what would happen if you stopped trying to prove your worth and simply let the truth unfold? If this story resonated with you, stay with this space. There are more stories like this one and more quiet victories worth telling.